So you may have seen, if you looked at the website, that we're going to talk tonight about water, the role of water in Buddhist mythology and scripture, and in some contemplative poems. And, as I know, many of us know that the Buddhists traveled around and taught for over 40 years. And it was the kind of teaching where he'd go from town to town, and we'd hear about him going to, beside the river Ganges or to Jedda's Grove, and people would gather around and listen to him talk. And for many, many years, these talks were unrecorded. So he would use metaphor and lists and stories to help make the essential points of his teachings. And then hundreds of years later, people started to memorialize these in writing and probably to editorialize as they did so. And ever since, for many, many centuries, we've been hearing the teachings as taught by, esteemed teachers. And sometimes, these are more of commentaries on the teachings of the Buddha. But tonight I wanted to bring some of those stories to the table and talk about those. And using water as a symbol, as a teacher, as a healer, as challenge, it appears through many, many Buddhist stories. And tonight I'm going to share a few of those stories. Some will be familiar, some will be commentary, as I said, and then there are a couple of poems. And I'm going to try to be clear about which is which when I'm talking about what were supposedly the words of the Buddha and what is commentary. And for those of you who are interested, if you look on the website at imeditation.org, you look on the Tuesday night talks, the description of this talk includes resources that are links to the suttas, links to the poems that I'll share. So if you ever want to look at the source, those are there tonight. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the stories and the lessons we can take from those, but I have to admit I won't necessarily be giving you the answers. I won't be telling you the lessons that are learned. Instead, I'm suggesting that tonight we do a little bit of reflection and contemplation about what do I take from that story? What does that story have to teach me? And we'll pause a few times to consider that. And there'll be opportunities if you'd like to share your thoughts. And then I'm thinking we'll have enough time at the end too, if you, like me, need a little time to think about it and want to wait till the end of the talk to pull together your thoughts or comments on what you might take from these readings. So for many of us, why water, right? For many of us, I just find that water has this really essential pull. It centers like some of my earliest memories. It has that powerful sense of, how you just feel different if you go to the edge of the ocean and you sit there and watch the waves, or you walk along the ocean. It just alters you. You sit by a bubbling brook and suddenly you feel more peaceful. And there's this sense that this water element in oceans and lakes and rivers somehow reverberates with these 60% water bodies of ours, that water element connects us in a very essential way. I'm reminded of the phrase that when you're really there, when you're present, when you're alive, we don't have to think too much, that I'm in my element, right? Well, sometimes we're in our water element. A great poet, David White, talked about his sense of the water element after he did a day kayaking on the waters of the Pacific Northwest. And this is how he described how the water felt. Clouds above, the snow-covered mountains, and the heaving weight of the lifting water seemed to concentrate the entire cycle through my transported body. my paddling arms, my exhilaration, and my lifetime memories of the element on which I rode. Water is the central conversational element that holds all of the great cycles of life and memory and even anticipation together. Water is the preserver of memory, the foundation of our everyday participation, the central animating force at the heart of our future and ever-moving conversation that holds them all together. So he speaks not only to the characteristics of water, that we know the movement, the flow, and the force, but also the characteristic of water that connects, the cyclic nature of water as a life force. So that was his description. Here's the poem he wrote after that kayaking trip. And this is, again, with gratitude to Jackie Erskine, who shared this beautiful poem with me and with some friends. It's called Where Many Rivers Meet by David White. All the water below me came from above. All the clouds living in the mountains gave it to the rivers who gave it to the sea, which was their dying. And so I float on cloud become water, central sea surrounded by white mountains, the water salt, once fresh, cloud fall and stream rush, tree roots and tide bank leading to the river's mouths, and the mouths of the rivers sing into the sea. The stories buried in the mountains give out into the sea, and the sea remembers and sings back from the depths where nothing is forgotten. So he speaks of water as storyteller and water as memory. Some personal examples of connecting to water. Last April, Lama Willa Baker had a Rewilding the Heart retreat here in our area. And there she led us in a practice called a water gazing practice. So after meditating on the water element, we were invited to sit in stillness by a body of water and discern, what did the water teach you? And I can still remember that experience of sitting on a pier, this beautiful pond, and it was so still that the reflection of the trees on the water was crystal clear. It was just flat, beautiful, smooth pond. But this water gazing practice went on, and slowly I started to see that beneath this flat, clear water was this little rippling of water, that there was movement going on that was hardly detectable. And then realizing that this beautiful flat pond was fed by a stream at the other end of the pond. It flowed through and it flowed out on the other end. So what did this water teach me? The overall effect was of still flowing water. The ability to be still, but still appreciate the flow of life. And that even stillness is not static, that nothing is permanent. And like the water element, we're a continual flow of experiences that pass through. So water is a touch point, and water is a teacher. I don't know about you, but some of my most poignant memories are by the water. I can remember my dad teaching me how to swim in the ocean. I can remember falling in love for the first time with waterfall falling on me. It was so romantic. Even that daily wisdom that of walking along the Rivanna River and getting, these constant lessons on impermanence, on letting go, and the flow of life. So I want to pause here and just invite you to take a little time for reflection, and you can close your eyes, you can leave them open. But you're not going to have to report on this if you don't want. Just recall a memory in which water was essential to the story. And if multiple ones come to mind, you can say, this one's most compelling. I'll choose this one. And to just consider, see if you can imagine what's happening in this story. Who's there? What sounds do you hear? How does the water fit into the story? And just noticing the quality of presence. How present do you feel? Do you perhaps feel any sense in the body or any feelings or emotions that are present? Maybe considering, what does this memory represent for you? Does the water have something to teach you, or perhaps it just makes you smile? All right, and then coming on back, I just, if anybody would like to share your personal examples of, your connection to water, anybody like to share one or two examples? I can just repeat it so you don't need a mic. Great.
My memory was floating in the ocean. I guess it was in North Carolina, but just it was a relatively calm night, and the water was the perfect temperature, and I just felt really supported. It was like I had to have to do anything. Both of us floating there and just really enjoying it. And the lesson came to me about just how supporting this world is. This earth is supporting us, and water is this super supporting element. And a little bit of a lesson for me about how hard I'm always trying to get things done or do things my way, and how you can just step back and let the water support you.
Wow, that's beautiful. Thank you so much. If anybody oops, two mics here. If anybody on Zoom would like to share, you might raise your hand by checking the reaction button, and raise your hand. That'll put you up at the top of the screen, and I'll call on you. Okay. Anybody else in here? Yeah. What's the mic? Okay.
My memory is a combination of the water and my father. We used to go to the beach, the ocean, and he would only come on the weekend. But I remember just struggling with the waves. I was probably 5, and I had a little canvas raft, and I would take the waves in, but often I would just get slammed. You know how that is. But when my father would come on the weekend, he would say, okay, if you're really, hold on, I will take you out beyond the surf. And so we would get to this place on the other side of all the turbulence where it was just magical. And I was on his shoulders, and it just, I just really treasure that.
What a beautiful memory. So many lessons in there, right?
Mine was the same as hers. Truly.
Truly.
Holding my hand.
Yeah. And Rebecca, you want to share? I heard. Is that true?
No, I hadn't raised my hand.
Okay. All right, no pressure then. We'll come back later. All right. Well, those are such beautiful stories. So much history there. Beautiful. I'm glad that we started off taking a journey through awareness, because I'm going to come back to the idea of David White's poem about his experience of kayaking. Inspired me to organize this a little bit around some kayaking a little closer to home in Charlottesville. A little trip down the Rivanna River, starting at Dardentow Park and ending at Riverview Park, which is just, maybe an hour's kayak ride on a day when the water's moving a little bit. And within that short float, though, just like these stories, there are all sorts of lessons that are reminiscent of some Buddhist teachings. So we'll stop a few times and bring in some of those teachings. So first stop, just hang in here with me if you haven't done this trip down the Rivanna, but you're launching at Dardentow Park. You're putting in off of this ramp. And then instead of heading downstream right away, sometimes Stan and I will turn our kayaks up and head them into these little mini rapids. So this little block of stones that goes almost across the river. So there's tiny little rapids coming down. And we turn our kayaks into that water, and you have to paddle with a lot of effort to keep going, against the current that you're facing into. And then you have to position your kayak just right, because if you go sideways, you're going to get, tossed and tumble over. But then at the right moment, as you're facing into the rapids, you can just let it go and it will take you down the river, and without effort. So paddling upstream into this water becomes an exercise. It's sort of a test of how much effort is needed to keep the kayak upright, to head it where you want it, see how strong you need to be, and what's needed from me to stay upright. So I'm going to connect that to a famous Buddhist story as told by Ajahn Chah. It's called Floating a Plate of Rice Against the Current. So there's a story in the scriptures about the Buddha before he was enlightened. At that time, having received a plate of rice, he floated that plate on a stream of water, determining in his mind, if I'm to be enlightened, may this plate float against the current of the water. The plate floated upstream. That plate was the Buddha's right view, or the Buddha nature, that he became awakened to. It didn't follow the desires of ordinary beings. It floated against the flow of his mind. It was contrary in every way. These days, in the same way, the Buddha's teaching is contrary to our hearts. People want to indulge in greed and hatred, but the Buddha won't let them. They want to be deluded, but the Buddha destroys delusions. So the mind of the Buddha is contrary to that of worldly beings. I find this a challenging teaching. Usually we think these teachings help us to go with the flow and learn to let go. And here we're being reminded that sometimes these teachings ask us to go against the flow of ordinary life. And we have to ask, when do these truths of existence that we learn in Buddhism, like there's suffering and impermanence and no permanent sense of self, when do those bump up against the world of ordinary beings? So in a world in which we want to deny aging and death, the Buddha's teachings ask us to contemplate impermanence, our body aging, dying, and decaying. In a world in which individualism is prized and we're encouraged to build our self-esteem, our resume, our wealth, we practice understanding interconnectedness and the existence of these bodies as a sack of elements, just like the rest of the world. In a world of consumerism, we try to practice renunciation and generosity. So how much effort does it take to go against the stream of modern culture when it's on our screens and in our hands, literally streaming to us every moment of every day? So this was the Buddha's right view, Ajahn Chah says. And the question is, can we have the wisdom to check our view, our intention, when we're going against the current? Is it for wholesome reasons? So, any thoughts on this teaching about going against the current? Anything that this would teach you? Okay, well, short's good.
I was just going to say that I don't think it would be going against the current if you surround yourself with people who are like-minded.
I think sometimes that's why we need the support, right? To have like-minded folks.
This is a small thing too, but when you said go against the current, in my mind, I thought about current times, just the idea of the word current also meaning now, and trying to find our way in this chaotic world. And sometimes that means going against the now.
Thank you.
I was thinking about the paddling upstream, and that the only way you can do that is to keep your paddle in the water.
Indeed. Keep on paddling. Well, I'm going to continue on our trip down the Rivanna. So there's next this long stretch of slow water. And you can make lots of different choices. You go in this long stretch going down towards Freebridge, and you can, go over to the side so you can get under the shade of a tree, or you can paddle down the middle to, paddle with economy. Or you can maybe just put your paddle down for a bit and sit and experience the flow down the river. So paddling down this open stretch of water brings me to the next story, which is the simile of the log. Now, this is from the Samyutta Nikaya, so it is in the words of the Buddha as written down eventually. On one occasion, the Blessed One was dwelling at Kasambi on the banks of the Ganges River. And the Blessed One saw a great log being swept along by the stream of the Ganges River and addressed the monks. Do you see, monks, that great log being swept along by the stream of the Ganges River? Yes, Bhante, they replied. Well, if, monks, that log does not approach the near bank, does not approach the far bank, does not sink in the middle, if it is not cast up on high ground, if humans do not grab it, if non-humans do not grab it, if whirlpools do not grab it, if it does not become inwardly rotten, in such a case, that log will slant toward the ocean, slope toward the ocean, incline toward the ocean. For what reason? Because the stream of the Ganges River slants toward the ocean, slopes toward the ocean, inclines toward the ocean. And repeating, as these often do, just so, monks, if you too do not approach the near bank, do not approach the far bank, do not sink in the middle, if you're not cast up on high ground, if humans do not grab you, if non-humans do not grab you, if whirlpools do not grab you, if you do not become inwardly rotten, in such a case, you will slant toward Nibbana, or enlightenment, slope toward Nibbana, incline toward Nibbana. For what reason? Because, monks, right view slants toward Nibbana, slopes toward Nibbana, inclines toward Nibbana. And the sutta goes on, and if you want to look at it, you'll see, to sort of explain what some of these non-humans and whirlpools are. But I found that this commentary by Ajahn Chah explained it a little more simply. So I'll read that, his log floating in the river. If we cut a log of wood and throw it into the river, and that log doesn't sink or rot or run aground on either of the banks of the river, that log will definitely reach the sea. Our practice is comparable to this. If you practice according to the path laid down by the Buddha, follow it straight, you will transcend two things. What two things? Just those two extremes that the Buddha said were not the path of a true meditator: indulgence in pleasure and indulgence in pain. These are the two banks of the river. One of the banks of the river is hate, the other is love. Or you can say that one bank is happiness, the other unhappiness. The log is the mind. And it flows down the river, it will experience happiness and unhappiness. And if the mind doesn't cling to that happiness or unhappiness, it will reach the ocean of Nibbana. You should see that there is nothing other than happiness or unhappiness arising and disappearing. And if you don't run aground on these things, then you're on the path of a true meditator. So these extremes of happiness and unhappiness, and our tendency to run and cling from one to the other. What do you take from this teaching? What did this water teach you? Any raised hands in Zoom world? John, I hear your hand is up. Would you like to?
Well, yeah, your last story reminded me, reminded me of aids to navigation that we find on waterways and rivers and things, like buoys that mark places where we should safely navigate, and they mark hazards to navigation and all that. So there's a fair amount of analogies that way with the teachings and our own sense of when we're getting into trouble with our thinking.
Oh, nice, thank you. And even the direction and navigation, I think of, the Eightfold Path as a path, a way, a marker of ways that we can go.
Hi. The coincidence is that today only I was reading in a book by the name Wise Heart by Jack Cornfield. It says a middle path, which means that you don't either follow the path of too much indulgence or too much denial. Just flow in between, and that will lead you to enlightenment and nirvana. Just be at ease and peace and follow the path.
Thank you. Yeah. So the middle way teachings. Yeah, thank you.
I've spent a lot of my life swimming hard to get to the bank of pleasure or happiness, and exhausting myself and trying too hard again. So it's like this idea of the individual, of that you're in control of your destiny, this myth that we're sort of given, especially as Americans, how you make your life, and there's so much of the time that striving actually ended up causing me more pain than happiness. Swimming against the current wears you out, and then you're not happy because you're exhausted.
And sometimes swimming against that current is not wise, right? Thank you. I appreciate hearing what you're taking from this. All right, one final step on the trip. So you keep going down the Rivanna River, and you get to this spot right above Riverview Park. And some of you may have sat on the bench that overlooks this, but it's a stretch of boulders that goes all the way across the river, just about. And so as you come up to this in the kayak and you approach it, you feel as though there's really no way through these rocks. But if you pause calmly and watch the flow of the water, you'll see that there are some spots where it's a little bit deeper, where the water flows through and it moves a little more freely over the rocks. And you can visualize a V where the water gets more smooth, and that sort of points you towards the space between the rocks where you can finally get through. Because this water element is fluid and flexible and patient and always flowing. But this is not necessarily easy. As the Buddha taught, we can get whirled about, we can sink, we can tip over. And many times as I squeeze through these rocky crevices in this section, my kayak will get, stuck on the bottom and I'm stuck for a couple of minutes, or I can tumble and fall over the rocks. Sometimes I get to the end there and I've turned around completely and I'm all discombobulated. And then I always look back to see who's coming behind me, to see my loved ones coming behind me. And I'm like, woo, I made it. And watching them come, the joy of getting through these rocky points. So that brings me to the scripture described as crossing the flood, as it was translated by Thanissaro Bhikkhu. In Jeta's Grove, a Devata, her extreme radiance lighting up the entirety of Jeta's Grove, went to the Blessed One. And on arrival, having bowed down to him, she stood to one side, and as she was standing there, she said to him, "Tell me, dear sir, how you crossed the flood." "I crossed the flood without pushing forward, without staying in place." "But how, dear sir, did you cross over the flood without pushing forward, without staying in place?" He responded, "When I pushed forward, I was whirled about. When I stayed in place, I sank. And so I crossed over the flood without pushing forward, without staying in place." In other teachings, they call this, I neither hurried nor tarried to cross the flood. A beautiful way to say it. And one other way that it's been said is this poem from the First Free Woman, the poems of the early Buddhist nuns. One of the poems is Upasama, or calm. And it asks, how do you cross the flood? You cross calmly, one step at a time, feeling for stones. How do you cross the flood, my heart? You cross calmly, one step at a time, or not at all. So this crossing to reach the other side, it can make us think of everyday difficulties, but in these teachings, it often refers to reaching Nibbana. And the fact that it requires steady forward motion, commitment, and intention and wise effort to reach the goal, to reach the other side. So, reflecting on this, what does the water teach you? Rather than stop here, I'm going to finish with a poem, and then we'll take a couple of minutes for comments. So we've reached the end of this journey down the Ravenna River. And I realized that our kayaks offer lots of lessons on impermanence. There are months when there's not enough rain and you can't float after July. And then some days, it's never the same. Some days it's hot and there's a lot of effort and it's slow. Other days it's perfectly clear and the water is flowing and it's exhilarating. This spring, my husband Dan sold his kayak because we're getting older and it's just too hard to get the kayak on the roof of the car. Although we will find a way to get on the water. So there are lessons everywhere in this natural world if we're just open to hear them and to see them. The water's our teacher, the trees are our teachers, and lessons are carried in the wind. I'm going to finish with segments of a poem by Mary Oliver that just so beautifully makes this point. It's called At the River Clarion. She says, I don't know who God is exactly, but I'll tell you this. I was sitting in the river named Clarion on a water-splashed stone, and all afternoon I listened to the voices of the river talking. Whenever the water struck a stone, it had something to say, and the water itself, and even the mosses trailing under the water. And slowly, very slowly, it became clear to me what they were saying. Said the river, I am part of holiness. And I too, said the stone. And I too, whispered the moss beneath the water. I'd been to the river before a few times. Don't blame the river that nothing happened quickly. You don't hear such voices in an hour or a day. You don't hear them at all if selfhood has stuffed your ears. And it's difficult to hear anything anyway through all the traffic, the ambition. If God exists, he isn't just butter and good luck. He's also the tick that killed my wonderful dog, Luke. Said the river, imagine everything you can imagine, then keep on going. Imagine how the lily, who may also be part of God, would sing to you if it could sing, if you would pause to hear it. And how are you so certain that it doesn't sing? My dog Luke lies in a grave in the forest she has given back. But the river Clarion still flows from wherever it comes from to where it has been told to go. I pray for the desperate earth. I pray for the desperate world. I do the little each person can do. It isn't much. Sometimes the river murmurs, sometimes it raves. Along its shores were, may I say, very intense cardinal flowers, and trees, and birds that have wings to uphold them, for heaven's sakes. The lucky ones, they have such deep natures. They're so happily obedient. While I sit here in a house filled with books, ideas, doubts, hesitations. And still, pressed deep into my mind, the river keeps coming, touching me, passing by on its long journey, its pale, infallible voice singing. So thank you, Mary Oliver. Huh? Nice. So we have just a few moments, and I wonder if there are any more reflections or teachings or connections to water that anyone would like to share. Oh, I see a hand up on Zoom. Want to invite? There we go. I'm sorry, I can't, go ahead.
Phyllis, let me lower my hand. So this might go in a slightly different tangent, but you were reminding me of some of my whitewater kayaking, we call it paddling days, which I still do. I mean, whitewater kayaking is one of my absolute passions in life. And I've been upside down a few times in rapids. I don't know how to roll, which is when you can right yourself. So I had to be able to like peel off my spray skirt and wiggle my way out of the kayak upside down and hopefully hold on to my paddle and come up. And I'm reminded of, in a case like that, the value of having one's paddling buddies. And in this case, I was thinking about the Sangha, you know, that sometimes we need the help of the Sangha, our travelers along the path, to help us along the way and get downriver and stay balanced and hopefully upright. But when we're not, they're there to support us. So thank you.
Thank you so much for adding that, Phyllis. They might be solo kayaks, but this is not a solo journey. Yeah. Any other comments from in here? Well, with that, I thank you for your attention. It was good to be with you. Many, many blessings, everyone.